Okay.
I can turn myself on. Hello out there. We are just getting set up and we will be streaming live soon. So I would normally just say that periodically. Let me go make sure that someone can check the sound for us and make sure that's right.
Okay.
Got my back channel going. Or if anyone is here in the chat, if you can just confirm that you can hear us both.
Hi.
Where did that come from? Was that you?
Oh wait, I opened the, okay, I'm gonna close it.
Oh yeah, don't have the stream going, otherwise we'll get a feedback loop.
Yeah,
Or it's gotta be on
okay.
mute. Yay, audio okay, thank you very much. So that's good. It's one thing down. So we'll just wait for more people to filter in and certainly wait for 2 o'clock.
Hi.
She loves Zoom because she just learned how to wave, and it's the perfect waving medium.
It is the perfect waving,
Yeah. Hey, yeah. So we are here just waiting for people to filter in. We'll get started in a little bit. Thanks for joining us. We'll start about 5 minutes after 2 to let people settle in. Hi there, if you're just joining us, we are just getting all set up and waiting for some people to filter in. We'll get started about 5 minutes after 2 o'clock. Getting our coffees, feeding our babies, doing all the things that we need to do before we properly live stream. Hey, you. So how are you doing, Morgan?
I'm doing all right. You're in New York also, right?
Yeah. It's tough.
It's tough. It makes a big difference to me when it's a sunny day.
Yeah, looked at the weather because we have a backyard, and so I really want to like make use of it. And I looked at the weather, and it's gonna be like rainy for the next gazillion days, and I was like, no, no. Uh oh.
It's funny how it like penetrates everything.
What? Sorry, say that again.
Oh, just I don't know. I never realized how big a difference weather makes when you're staying indoors for the most
Yeah,
part.
it's true
Oh,
though. Well, it comes in, just that little bit, and that little bit right now counts for a lot.
with
Ooh, it's really laggy.
us good.
I'm gonna try closing some stuff and try to make it a little bit better. Um,
Is that better?
I can hear you clearly when you said that, so that does seem a bit better. I'm trying to close stuff on my end too. And Morgan, do you want to do a Q&A at the end?
Sure. Like if people have questions.
Yeah, and people normally do. Hopefully they will.
And do they just type it in the chat box?
Yeah, and I can moderate it for you.
Oh, you can moderate. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Hey, if you're just joining us, we're just letting people filter in, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. We're pleased to say that we're broadcasting to you from sunny New York. At least for the moment.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, hopefully it's a bit of a stronger connection now. It's nothing competing.
Always happy to have Lorna Mills in the chat.
I'll be.
Yep. So if you're just joining us, we're going to get started in a few minutes. Just letting people filter in. Getting all set up. Done.
Mhm. Yeah, it's great for waiting.
My co-host signing on and signing off here. Okay, Gardy.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hi there. Welcome to Well Now What the Fuck events. If you have gotten here from some channel that is not Well Now What the Fuck, let me tell you a little bit about what it is. It is an online exhibition with 90 plus moving image artists co-curated by myself, Lorna Mills, and Wade Wallerstein. We are here doing an event series, and I just want to tell you a little bit about what is coming up on May 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are going to have a panel called Emotional Materiality Across Mixed Realities. The discussion will be led by Dorothy Santos with panelists Laura Hunji Kim, Tiare Ribot, Carla Ganis, and Clark Buckner. And then the next day, on Saturday, May 2nd at 2 p.m., we are going to be reopening the exhibition. And we are welcoming another 25 plus artists, and we will be streaming an opening event. So join us then. So now I would like to introduce Morgan. Sorry, let me pull it up. Morgan Green is a writer and artist who works to disrupt stasis in the ways that people read words and bodies. At present, she is scrutinizing the work that the digital does on the body, as well as the work that flesh does on machines. Ultimately, this means working beyond the place where machines and people begin to merge and into the genealogy of cyborgs. Her professional background as a coder informs and shapes this arena of her practice. She exploits computers for their ability to proliferate text and images rapidly. She uses code to recontextualize the component parts of signifiers, and in this way to spread apart the pieces of the constellated machines that restrict the body and the self. She is disassembling the web of cybernetic forces that accrete to structure, time, space, and thereby formulate body minds, excuse me. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan, who is going to be performing The Passion of the Neutral. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait. One more thing. Today we're going to be run by donations. So if you've gotten here by some other means, please go over to wellnow.whatthefuck and hit that donation button. Please give Morgan some money for this performance that we're about to see. So thank you. All yours.
After lunch on Thursday, the 24th of October, 1776, I followed paths across the vineyards and meadows as far as Chevron. I crossed over the cheerful countryside which separates these two villages. Then I made a detour in order to come back across the same meadows by taking a different route. I was on the road down from Menilmontant about 6 o'clock when some people walking ahead of me suddenly swerved aside and I saw a huge Great Dane rushing down upon me. Racing before our carriage, the dog had no time to check its pace or to turn aside when it noticed me. I judged that the only means I had to avoid being knocked to the ground was to make a great leap, so well timed that the dog would pass under me while I was still in the air. This idea, quicker than a flash in which I had the time neither to think through nor carry out, was my last before my accident. I did not feel the blow, nor the fall, nor anything of what followed until the moment I came to. It was almost night when I regained consciousness. I found myself in the arms of 3 or 4 young people who told me what had just happened to me. The Great Dane, unable to check its bound. Night was coming on. I perceived the sky, some stars, and a little greenery. This first sensation was a delicious moment. I still had no feeling of myself except as being over there. I was born into life at the instant, and it seemed to me that I filled all the objects I perceived with my frail existence. Entirely absorbed in the present moment, I remembered nothing. I had no notion of person nor the least idea of what had just happened to me. I knew neither who I was nor where I was. I felt neither injury, fear, nor worry. I watched my blood flow as I would have watched a brook flow, without even suspecting that this blood belonged to me in any way. I felt a rapturous calm in my whole being, and each time I remember it, I find nothing comparable to it in all the activity of known pleasures. That was Bart quoting Rousseau. Mm. I have often given this example, S versus Z, for it is not the same thing to eat poisson, fish, or poisson, poison. This is phonological, but there are also semantic oppositions, white versus black. Put another way, according to the perspective of Saussure, to which on this matter I remain faithful, the paradigm is the wellspring of meaning. Where there is meaning, there is paradigm. And where there is paradigm, opposition, there is meaning. Elliptically put, meaning is on conflict, the choice of one term against another, and all conflict generative of meaning. To choose one and refuse the other is always a sacrifice made to meaning, to produce meaning, to offer it, to be consumed. My definition of the neutral remains structural, by which I mean that for me, the neutral doesn't refer to impressions of grayness, of neutrality, of indifference. The neutral, My neutral can refer to intense, strong, unprecedented states. To outplay the paradigm is an ardent, burning activity. The first question, the first neutral, announced subject of the course is the difference that separates the will to live from the will to possess. The will to live being then recognized as what transcends the will to possess, as the drifting far from arrogance. I leave the will to possess. I move in the will to live. The second question, the second neutral, implicit subject of the course is the difference that separates this already decanted will to live from vitality. Pasolini in a poem says that the last thing that remains to him is a desperate vitality. Desperate vitality is the hatred of death. What is it then that sets retreat from arrogance apart from hated death? It's this difficult, incredibly strong, and almost unthinkable distance that I call the neutral, the second neutral. In the end, its essential form is a protestation. It consists of saying, it matters little to me to know if God exists or not. But what I know and will know to the end is that he shouldn't have simultaneously created love and death. The neutral is this irreducible no. A no, so to speak, suspended in front of the hardenings of both faith and certitude, and incorruptible by either one. Depression is increasingly recognized as a nosological reality, perhaps through the creation of a supposedly relevant pharmacopoeia. One can have sick leaves for depression, exemptions from military service, etc. But weariness, try this experiment. Draw up a table of received credible excuses you want to cancel a lecture, an intellectual task. What excuses will be beyond suspicion, beyond reply? Weariness? Surely not. Flu? Bad. Banal. A surgical operation? Better, but watch out for the vengeance of fate, the way society codifies mourning in order to assimilate it. After a few weeks, society will reclaim its rights, will no longer accept mourning as a state of exception. Requests will begin again as if it were incomprehensible that one could refuse them. Too bad if mourning disorganizes you longer than stated by the code. Society has always coded the duration of mourning. Manners and the memento la Russe, end of the 19th century, father or mother, 18 months. At least it was a generous, large-scale framework. Today, the right to mourning very reduced. Right to mourning to be inscribed in the social claims, utopias. Sick leave for pregnancy, for mourning. Thus, weariness is not coded, is not received, always functions in language as a mere metaphor, a sign without referent, chimera. That is part of the domain of the artist, of the intellectual as artist. Unclassified, therefore unclassifiable, without premises, without place, socially untenable. Whence Blanchot's weary cry. I don't ask that weariness be done away with. I ask to be led back to a region where it might be possible to be weary. weariness, exhausting claim of the individual body that demands the right to social repose. That sociality in me rest a moment, topical theme of the neutral. In fact, weariness is an intensity. Society doesn't recognize intensities. Principle of tact. I must return so as to start from it one more time to a citation from Sade on the principle of tact. The Marquise de Sade, having asked the imprisoned Marquis to have his dirty linen sent out to her, knowing the Marquise for what other reason than to have it washed. Sade pretends to see her in her request another, properly Sabian motive. Charming creature, you want my dirty linen, my old linen? Do you know that is complete tact? You see how I sense the value of things. Listen, angel, I have every wish in the world to satisfy you in this manner, because you know the respect I have for tastes, for fantasies, however baroque they may be. I find them all respectable, and because one is not the master of them, and because the most singular and bizarre of them, when well analyzed, always depends on a principle of tact. Never separate a behavior from the account the subject gives of it, for the word penetrates the act throughout. Sade's very utterance exposes what the principle of tact is: a pleasure, jouissance, an analysis, a verbal operation that frustrates expectation. The laundry is dirty in order to be washed, and intimates that tact is a perversion that plays with the useless, non-functional detail. The analysis generates minutiae, a possible meaning for delicate through dubious etymology, and it's this cutting and rerouting that is the source of pleasure. One could say pleasure is the futile, fundo, which flows that nothing withholds. In short, tact, analysis to untie when aimless. Such is the background, the semantic web. Thus, we as well. Let's analyze. The laundry is dirty in order to be washed. A dictionary, not of definitions, but of twinkling scintillations. In reality, this neutral awakening, precious, rare, fragile, brief, relates back to the substance of sleep. It is like a readable, perceptible, verbalizable version of utopian sleep. Indeed, the aporia of sleep, anticipated, fantasized as a happy state, but one we can only report about in a non-sleeping state, implies a divided consciousness cut off from speech, and that we will call it utopian sleep or utopia of sleep, since we can't speak of it except as a fantasy. Sleep that can only be inferred from some privileged awakenings, so fragile that they are heart-rending. The idea of sleep as dream caught up in a mythology of productivity, of work, dream work. Sleep is useful for something. Not only does it restore, regain, recuperate, it also transforms, labors, it is productive, rescued from the disgrace of the good for nothing. Psychoanalysis instituted the idea of the producing dream. material for analysis. Ideology of work, one doesn't dream for nothing, not utopian sleep, dreamless. Falling asleep, unproductive, is even defined by the fact that it is a kind of unconditional expenditure, the very essence of perversion. All in all, it would be a perverse sleep. Sleep, love, benevolence. As a utopia, to finish, sleep has to be linked not to one but to two. There can be no solipsistic utopia. Form of this sleep utopia, to sleep together, adu. That's to say, recall of dreamless sleep, one doesn't sleep as a twosome. The dream separates, solipsizes. It's the archetype of the soliloquy. To sleep as a couple in an essential way, if not in its contingent occurrence. Dreamless sleep, since dream is narcissistic. Utopia of sleeping as a couple could be desired as absolute act of love, and whatever its realization as a golden fantasy. Why? Sleep thoroughly woven of trust. To sleep mobilization of trust. To sleep on both ears, on the ear of the other and one's own. To sleep with one ear open. To sleep together utopically implies, or not to sleep with one ear open. To sleep together utopically implies that the fear of one's image being surprised is abolished. Little matter that I be seen while sleeping. Albertine's sleep observed by the narrator, act of falling in love, of love passion, not of love. Because the gaze sets oneself apart. Drags, dodges, hollow corrections. Everything about the neutral is about sidestepping assertion. I won't do more here than raise the principle of a file about ways of sidestepping affirmation that occur right at the level of language. Sidestepping suggests the idea that here negation or denial doesn't undo assertion but counters it. It is itself assertion of the no, arrogant affirmation of the negation. The writing subject, feeling the statutory arrogance of language discourse, is tempted to relativize sentences in a coded way. It's the oratorical precaution. In my humble opinion, it seems to me, for my part, I believe that. Of course, I understood this very quickly. This doesn't change anything to anything. The assertion, the arrogance remains intact, for the only thing the precaution does is satisfy the imaginary of the speaking subject, who tolerates their image more easily if they dampen down its superb. In fact, writing is fundamentally assertive. The best remains to accept it stoically, tragically, to speak, to write, to hold still about the wound of affirmation. Dict. Within the idiosphere, the indefatigable language, the indefatigability of language, its infinite perpetuation somehow stands for the very hardness of power. It's the inexorable language that runs, but one can't pray. Don't forget that in Latin, even if it is just an an etymological coincidence that I overinterpret. Dicto, repetitive, to repeat, to say and insisting, and to prescribe, to order, dictator. Beautiful citation of Blanchot on the terrifying perpetuation of language as a properly fascist ordeal. Someone who speaks without pause. Let us recall Hitler's terrible monologues. And every head of state participates in the same violence of this dictation, the repetition of an imperious monologue. When he enjoys the power of being the only one to speak and, rejoicing in possession of his high, solitary word, imposes it without restraint as a superior and supreme speech upon others. Finally, a personal incident which will nicely introduce the figures to come. Thursday, March 9th, fine afternoon, I go out to buy some paints, bottles of pigments. Following my taste for the names, golden yellow, sky blue, brilliant green, purple, sun yellow, Cartham pink, a rather intense pink. I buy 16 bottles. In putting them away, I knock one over, and sponging up, I make a new mess, little domestic complications. And now I am going to give you the official name of the spilled color, a name printed on the small bottle, as on the others, vermilion, turquoise, etc. It was the color called neutral. Obviously, I had opened this bottle first to see what kind of color was this neutral, about which I am going to be speaking for so long. Well, I was both punished and disappointed. Punished because neutral spatters and stains is a type of dull gray-black. Disappointed because neutral is a color like the others and for sale. Therefore, neutral is not unmarketable. The unclassifiable is classified. All the more reason for us to go back to discourse, which at least cannot say what the neutral is. Okay, thank you. That was it.
Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. So we are going to open it up to questions. If anyone might have any questions or comments in the chat, and I imagine people are going to take a minute to think about it, but I would love to open it up with my own question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about the relationship of your reading and the performance with what's going on behind you? Because I kept kind of going back and forth a little bit and wondering kind of like how the two fit together.
Okay, yeah, so behind me is a milk factory operating in, I believe, the 1940s. So that's about 30 years before Roland Barthes did the lecture series on the neutral that I was quoting from. But I was interested in this partly because I was interested in kind of the idea of milk as a neutral substance, but also because I only there is a definite relationship between the work that he's doing in this lecture series that's transcribed in this book that I'm reading from, and sort of supply chains and labor. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of interested in, and I quote a little bit from the way he addresses those things when I talk about both like weariness as something that can't be used as an excuse to not work, which was true in 1978 when he did this lecture, and I think even truer now. Like you have to have a better excuse than being exhausted or weary to not come in. And then also he's talking about this idea that people are trying to make their dreams even into something productive. They're trying to make sleep into something productive by using their dreams as a kind of labor. So, and now we have this sort of like relationship between labor and pandemic and supply chains and worry and anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of thought that this would be a weird roundabout way to remind people that this text is a bit prescient or topical or remains a bit topical. But I also am just like, I was always really fascinated by like the Mr. Rogers videos of that stuff. So I find it, I guess it's neutral in that it's sort of, or like maybe parries a paradigm in the sense that it is both a really concrete image of hidden labor and machine labor and animal labor. But also I find it weirdly calming. This milk production. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally did. I just have like a particular relationship to it as a human who's producing milk right now. So I,
Yeah.
there's so it's yeah, it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about that chain reaction, and thinking about milk is neutral, which of course we know it's not, and those are all the ways in which it's, or those are some of the ways, those are the starts of the ways in which it's not. Does anyone else have any other questions, or otherwise I have more. um, so I wanted to ask you, I mean, talking a little bit before before you did this performance, you were telling me about the text, and I'm a big Bart fan, and I haven't read these, but it does seem sort of typically Bartian in that it's like kind of like just around the thing itself,
Yeah.
without kind of defining the thing itself, and I'm wondering, um, does it produce for you a working definition of the neutral? Yeah, maybe that's the question.
So early on, he says something like, I'm not trying to define a word, I'm trying to name a thing. And yeah, so it's kind of like, as printed here, it's like 200 pages of like not defining a thing, but instead describing it. But that said, the closest he comes to doing it is he talks about kind of parrying a paradigm or baffling a paradigm, or what's the other word? Oh, I forget. There's one that he uses more often, but kind of getting around a paradigm, and then he's like talking about the paradigmatic as things that are like dialectical, or that like something that is beyond conflict between two things
Mm-hmm.
as a total source of meaning. So it's confusing, but I'm really into like, and he addresses gender briefly in it, not always in the most productive way, but I do think that there's something there in terms of, yeah, just being outside two-ness as as a framework for seeing like everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's kind of, yeah. So he says that in a bunch of different ways, but I think he's more interested, like, but it's kind of easy to say that, but it's harder to put your finger on anything that actually does it.
Right.
So that's what he's kind of trying to do throughout the text.
And is this a performance, and is this a text that you went to specifically, like went back to specifically because of like current conditions in quarantine, or is this something that you had already developed?
I think that I've been, this text is obvious, it's very dense and it's very rich, so there's a lot that you can derive from it. I kind of tried to pick a series of excerpts that specifically address themselves to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they do that might be a little bit personal to me, so I don't know if it's really obvious, but at least I guess like for me, these are excerpts that make the situation right now a little bit more legible or feel a little bit less scary. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's hard to distinguish between, I don't know, the desire to kind of write this moment onto everything else versus things that were specifically designed
right.
for this moment. Like, my partner was like, we were watching a film, and he was like, oh, it has this resonance with Zoom, and like looking off camera in Zoom, and this and that. And of course, there are no films that address that really, at this point. So it's like, it's so easy to write on this moment to almost everything. So I was just kind of curious where, like, where this text fell in with you, and like when you went back to it. Um, yeah, I wonder. It's interesting too, like the neutral. So much of what I teach, and so does my partner, and both of us have been thinking about teaching, is obviously this activity, and it's productive, much like filling, milk jugs. But then it's also this non-activity because we're not in the same space as our students. And I'm wondering, did you think about the neutral as a kind of metaphor for quarantine in some ways, that there are these kind of acute pleasures, and and but also this, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I do think that the main way in which the work seems especially prescient about this, or especially relevant to this moment, is it's just like, I feel like for everyone it does change your relationship to labor.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like, I grew up in the Midwest, and it's very difficult for me to sort of, and for a variety of other reasons, but it's difficult for me to sort of like see my value outside of what I produce.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've been trying to learn to do that for a long time. But just the way the economy is changing in this situation, and also the way product is differently available when you're alone in your apartment than when you can be in the outside world, it kind of forces you to reconsider the value of labor in a way that's different, in a way that I think is like, I'm tired of people talking about this as a potentially positive thing, because I'm not,
Not
I don't
buying
know,
it.
I'm not interested in the idea of death as transformative, really, of like inequitable death as transformative for some people or whatever. But I'm also, it is nice to, like, everything's complex and has a variety of outcomes, and I am interested in focusing a little bit on those outcomes where we aren't attempting to reframe how we value our reality, but are forced to do so, and not even necessarily in a violent way. It's just sort of the product of, I mean, it's funny to use the word product, but like, it's inevitably going to happen that your position on certain kinds of value judgments is going to change when you can't access things in the same way, and when your
Right.
work can't be rewarded in the same way. So yeah, I don't know, I think that's kind of cool. I think that's one thing about the situation that's kind of cool, although I'm not interested in framing this situation as like something that's positively transformative
Right.
either.
Well, I think
Yeah.
this situation is not positive for any number of reasons,
Yeah.
but we're here, so we have to sort of deal with it, and maybe find the pleasures where they may lie. That's certainly, I think, what Bart would
Yeah.
try to do. Okay. There are some questions coming in. One from Wade. What sorts of systems, models, worlds are possible in post quarantine mindset? How can we reevaluate our own positions and think through new ways of operating, aka de emphasizing outputs?
That's a big question, and that's a
Yeah.
really good question. If I knew how to do that stuff, I totally would. But I think that, I mean, I guess for me, and I think like, even though this text is very theoretical, the pleasure of it for me comes through imagery. So like when he's talking about sleeping, or even like the idea of sleeping next to someone who is not dreaming when you are also not dreaming, the idea of that is kind of an anti-solipsism, even though it's not exact. It's kind of an image, but it's also hard to hold in your mind, because like he says, you can't really access the experience of sleep when you're not sleeping. So
Mm.
there's this sort of like I feel like that's an exercise in imagination that has the potential to be instructive, because you're like, okay, like, let me try to imagine what's that, like, let me imagine sleeping dreamlessly, one, and let me imagine sleeping dreamlessly with a partner, two. Like, it's not something that we are actually equipped to imagine during waking life, because you can't remember, like you can remember your dreams, but you can only, like he says, you can only remember the feeling of falling asleep and the feeling of waking up. Like you don't remember, but you sort of can, but you sort of feel like you
speculative.
can. So if I'm going to use BART as maybe just an exercise that could hopefully get us to a place where we de-emphasize output in the way that we see ourselves or we see our world. I think these sort of like imaginative exercises that he implicitly proposes can be really helpful. Like, yeah, I know I can't imagine a dreamless sleep, but I also know that I can try to do so. I think that's cool. And then when you go through and the sort of just, I mean, it becomes a bit tropey to talk about being present, but I do think that descriptive imagery has a real value to me. Like, it's like I really like cooking, and I really like sort of like completely experiencing the ingredients in my food while I'm cooking. And I don't know if that offers a total counterpoint to the idea. Like if I think about like the color of the shallots that I'm cooking with, and I don't think about what the food's going to taste like, is that an opportunity to think about something else than output? Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that's more of a cliche. I'm more interested in the dream thing I just said, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe I like both, but yeah, I think that kind of imaginative exercise is something that is at least going to move us toward the place where we can be in a different system of value, or a system where value is not, where it's something else than like value, because value suggests like assigning a number to more or less everything. I would like to do that less.
Quantification, yeah. Okay, we have another question. If you could talk more about the source of the Rousseau quote at the beginning and the relationship between Bart and Rousseau.
Okay, I might have to go into the book in order to do that, but let me see. So actually, I've got the PDF here, and I've got the book here. Yeah, unfortunately, I might not be able to give you a good answer because I don't know very much about Rousseau. But I do know, so that's from this kind of text that's primary here. I think the best I'm going to be able to. Sorry, I just dropped some stuff. Okay.
Something crashed in the milk factory.
Something crashed in the milk factory. All right, the best I can do, I think, is give you the name of the source, which is, and I don't speak French either, but it's Les Rêveries du Promenade Solitaire. So the reveries of something solitary is where that's coming from. And I adore that part of the book, but that's all the context I've got. But hopefully that, I don't know, makes it a little easier to Google it.
And then Wade says, crazy to think about leaving quarantine only remembering the moments we enter and exit. It's sort of interesting. It actually is all kind of reminding me what you said, and thinking about this entry and exit of the novel My Year of Rest and Relaxation.
Oh, I read that.
By Matissa, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her name, but Moshfegh.
Yeah, Tessa Moshfegh, I think, something like that.
And this kind of like nothingness of being, or the neutral of being, or trying to get, actually it's more like striving to get to neutral rather than being neutral, because that's the state that she can't achieve. It's just like pain, frankly, that she's trying to escape. And yeah, that does feel, I've thought frequently about that novel during this time, actually.
Yeah, I've thought about it a bit too. I was kind of thinking about maybe giving it another read, but yeah, because she's sort of, and I think it's what you were saying about how it's easy to project this moment onto everything. Like, I mean, anytime, it's actually surprising
how often you'll encounter like a movie or an episode of TV where somebody's has to be alone in their room for some reason. Like it happens, you would think. And then, not to spoil it, but she makes a choice to self-quarantine, and she is trying to do the opposite of work deliberately. She's trying to find a way to be as unproductive as possible because she thinks it's going to be transformative. And the way she chooses to do it is kind of destructive. But
well, it's funny to call it quarantine because that's not what she would. Yeah, that's not what she calls it. But that's what it looks like in retrospect. Yeah.
Yeah. Like reading that book now would just feel different because she is choosing something that at least in many ways resembles something that we have to do regardless of what we would prefer. Yeah. And there have been like, there's like that Chekhov story, I forget what it's called, but where they do, and I read the story when I was like a teenager and I found it absurd at the time, but this guy is forced to be alone with a bunch of books in a room for like a year or something like that. It's been a while, so I remember getting the details wrong, but he has to be alone in his room for like a year, and at the end of it, instead of reveling and being allowed to leave, he's like, no, I'd rather stay alone with these books because that's a more fulfilling existence. And I was like, fuck that, nobody feels that way.
Well, that actually reminds me more of like the Twilight Zone, you know, the episode where the man is like the last person on Earth and he has survived with all of his books, and then the first thing that happens is he breaks his glasses. That's what it reminds me of more than anything else.
That's really funny.
Yeah, so yeah, a couple of people are saying, I wonder what neutral isolation looks like. Doesn't feel neutral, I agree. Several dream archives are being compiled during this time. Yeah, I was hearing about people having particularly, people are having anxiety dreams because this is an anxious time. And so people are studying that. Yeah. Are there any other questions from the chat? Or anything else, Morgan, that you wanted to say as we start to wrap things up?
I feel pretty good about that conversation. I'll hold up the book again in case anybody wants to check it out. It's actually kind of hard to get.
I don't know of it. So
yeah, I want it. It's not one of his more popular, because it wasn't written to be a book.
Right, it was his lectures.
And I think he says somewhere in it that he had no intention of ever like committing the content of the lecture series to print, but I'm glad that someone did it. Oh, and I wanted to acknowledge the translators, Rosalind Krauss.
Okay.
Rosalind Krauss, and her partner, Dennis Hollier. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but they did a really good job. So.
Oh, we do have one more question from the chat, and it's from Wade, who says, I'd love to hear more about your piece in Well Now, What the Fuck?
Oh, okay, sure. I mean, it doesn't have a direct relationship to this performance, but it's a video I did with Devin Kenny like in 2013, so a while ago now.
Yeah.
And basically, it's like, so we just decided to make a music video for this song of his, which is called DK2.mp3, and it's this rumination on an ex, a relationship that's over, basically, or it's a kind of, the song's about the experience of like waiting for the bus and remembering somebody, or being with someone else and remembering somebody, and it's like moody and deep, and it references Marina Abramovich briefly, but I just wanted to do this thing where instead of one person making eye contact with a zillion people, where you're sort of centering the artist who is present, I was more interested in centering the contact, so I had a bunch of different people maintain eye contact, and I just filmed that, or we just filmed it. And yeah, there's like one with a mother and son where after like 5 minutes of just like looking at her son in the eyes, this woman starts to weep, and her son's like, he's like 10 years old. He's like, what's wrong? And there's a few that are between people who never met before. There's one between a couple that got engaged like a few months after. I don't know how they're doing now, but that was cool.
I hope they're doing well.
I bet they're doing well. More than likely, I just don't want to. I don't. But yeah, and so it was sort of like riffing on like what was topical in contemporary art at the time. And yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a bit of relationship between like eye contact and being asleep, maybe.
Right.
But it was a really cool remake, and I still really enjoy watching it.
Great, thank you so much. So once again, if you go to wellnow.wtf, please go ahead and hit that donate here button. All the donations for today are going to go directly to Morgan minus whatever PayPal takes. And thank you again, Morgan, for performing for us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.